I am doing awesome. Thank you for asking. Let me share my screen with you guys. No, that is my camera. Sorry. There we go. Can you guys confirm real quick that you can see my screen? Awesome. All right. Well, today was a weird day. We'll get right into it. We were only looking to trade the morning based on the understanding of the economic calendar, and we also had 10 a.m. news. If we look at the candle that was printed, we finally reached our buy side objective. So I'm not expecting much from tomorrow, especially since it is also not a high probability trading day. But after a large range day, which if we look at today, we did close to 400 handles, I'm not expecting much. I'm gonna dive down to the 4 hour chart very quickly to show you guys how we could have framed this as our true objective with original consolidation. We had a first initial redistribution lower, followed by a second one, which caused smart money reversal after taking all of these objectives. And more specifically, if we look at a daily chart, SMT formed at these lows gave us the insight that we were going to be reversing, right? This is all stuff we saw in this week's outlook, right? In the weekly outlook, and it is should not be at least anything new. But once you dive down to a 4 hour, you can see the clear redistribution and more specifically what happened today. And I'm looking at the London session. We retraced into our beautiful volume imbalance right here, which when we have a volume imbalance coupled with a fair value gap, we combine both to form the fair value gap. I just did a 1 minute fair value gap. Give me a second. These, by the way, these setups are all for visibility so that I don't see my 4 hour fair value gaps when I'm on the daily time frame, but I do see them when I go lower. For example, this is 1 hour, we can still see our 4 hour fair value gap. We don't need to go lower because the 4 hour is super clean, right? Internal, and you were expecting an external move, and then you have low resistance, swing points, sorry, and just followed by more low resistance and more and more and even more. So definitely you had clear objectives for the full day. Honestly, you did not need much. It was just bullish, 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 and as a friend of mine likes to say, fuck your shorts. And if we point out this inverted fair value gap, that's where you could have found a setup more specifically during the 10 a.m. macro. 10 a.m. power of 3, 10 a.m. macro. We can dive into a 15-minute chart. And if I pop up my sessions indicator right here for a second, let me just do them all correctly. You can see we had no frameworks. We didn't have a previous PM since we opened way above, and we didn't have a London framework. Even though we took out the highs of this framework, we were extremely bullish. So we were expecting that the higher the low of the day would be formed during London. And if we look at the daily power of 3, right, we look at the candle on our right, that's what we did. We opened and oh, okay, it's not showing up the open as 145, it's just overlapping. So we open accumulation through Asian range, manipulation lower during London, forming the higher the low of the day, which happens more often than you think and happens on classic buy days. If we draw this day out, what we see is we opened, we went and formed the low, expanded to a high, and are now currently retracing to a close. This is a classic buy day, and you look at the midnight opening price to frame this classic daily profile. So just classic buy day. Once I'm at this point during New York, I'm not looking for anything other than longs. And if we look specifically, this was, let me just mark it out so you guys are not confused, inverted fair value gap 4 hour time frame. So that's where we could frame our setups. If we look at the 15 minutes, we had great confluence because we had an overlapping, actually high probability order block, and I don't know why it is currently hiding. Okay, so I do need to change those settings. My bearish order block settings are fine. All right, so let me just switch that up really quickly because it is a bullish order block, and I'm going to mark it out as a 15-minute bullish order block. Once more, what we did have, if I just put my cross so we can see, is SMT at this specific level. So I'm also going to mark this out. And yes, we did have SNT with the previous swing as well, but I like to look for the latest swing. And yes, I could mark this one out, but this is not a swing point on NASDAQ while it is on ES. So the SMT I'm going to mark out is this one. The important part is just to notice that there is SMT at this endpoint. There is divergence at this level. So clearly your best setup was on NASDAQ. And if we look just at objectives, ES just barely reached it in the afternoon, and our 10 a.m. candle actually reached it for NASDAQ. So ES waited for the afternoon to reach said target because it was the weaker asset, as we have determined through higher time frame SMT and now in our 15-minute through lower time frame SMT this morning. Now diving down to a 1-minute chart, and let's go look at if we had a setup. Because for the ones that were looking at the chat, you'll notice that I didn't trade today. I did not have a setup. I could have turtle souped, I could have done much, but I did not have a setup, and I decided to step out because after the morning session, I actually closed my charts right here. Because after this first expansion, I'm not going to look for a continuation. We've already done such a large move overnight. So 200 handles. But 10 a.m. news, you're looking for Judah swing lower because you're bullish. More importantly, taking out liquidity as well as with the confluence of the SMT, you had your clear framework. Let's just call it a framework. From this low, you expect it to go up. Of course, with a wick like this, we retraced into it. And if we look at the quarters of our wick, like I pointed out that you guys should do, we failed to reach the following level. So from this point on, and after retesting equilibrium and bouncing back, I'm looking for a long. And yes, you did have from this swing low, this swing high, this is a breaker block, but more specifically, this is a breaker block right here. But you'll notice one thing from today. You don't have a retracement into an inverted fair value gap or a fair value gap. You did have, no, you did not even have that. Sorry, I'm looking at a Reaper, which is not something I want to get into today, but even that you did not have a retracement into. You had a bunch of breaker blocks that gave you a clear objective from this level, taking this 4-hour fair value gap, but you had no possible entry. And if we go look at the 5-minute possibly, we might see a 5-minute entry. Very fast here, I see a 5-minute inverted fair value gap, but was it the same exact level? Let's check, right? I did not check my 5-minute when I was live. The low of this candle is 18,838. I'm always looking at the top right here. And the close of this candle is 18,838. So it actually did not inverse up until this candle and never retraced back into it. So there is no possible outcome. There is a Reaper here, which again, we did revisit to the tick. So there was a Reaper entry, which is not something I'm interested in taking personally. So truly the only entry I see was the turtle soup into this 15-minute fair value gap, order block, sorry, not fair value gap. So for me, no entry. You could have taken a continuation entry during the 1050 to 1110 macro. So let me just mark this out. You've already framed that it's a classic buy day, so you're expecting a continuation towards your highest objective, right? Which is the buy side. I just want to check. It doesn't seem I have it marked out, so I'm just going to mark it out. Oh, yes, I did, but just not in the best way possible. Give me a second. So this was your external range buy side liquidity. If we go back to our 1-minute chart, your objective was not yet reached during your 1050. Let me just mark it out. 1050 to 1110 macro. So you could have looked for a continuation of the expansion since you've already profiled the day, as a classic buy day. So because of that, you don't expect the 1050 to 1110 macro to pool against profitable traders. You expect it to continue the classic buy day. And if we look what happened specifically during that macro, that's exactly what we did. But you'll be, I hope you are not surprised actually, see that there was no reentry until very late in the range. So we made our breaker block right here. One thing I did not check at this specific time, because as I said, I left my charts at this time, was if there was SMT. So I am currently looking. There is divergence swing points here. So there was SMT at this specific level. Let me mark it out. I like to mark out my lower time frame SMT a different color just so I don't get confused in the long run. So this swing point with this swing point. So we did have SMT, which formed the breaker block, and as you can see, we did not retrace in this fair value gap or this fair value gap, but you did have this fair value gap in close proximity. So personally, I was away from my charts, so it's a little hard for me to want to trade this, but it is a fair value gap in close proximity. The only thing I don't like about it is how it is a premium fair value gap. But since we are in the midst of a low resistance liquidity run to our weekly objective, you could justify using said fair value gap, even if it's in premium, because you do not expect it to retrace all the way down. But if we look on ES, we did retrace to a discount, and more specifically, swept liquidity into a discount in efficiency. So ES was perfect, pretty much. And since NASDAQ was the weaker asset, well, actually, NASDAQ being the weaker asset, you would anticipate it to be the one that retraced lower. But based on our higher time frame expansion, NASDAQ is our stronger asset, right? As we've noticed with our higher time frame SMT in our 15-minute and for our 4-hour chart. So clearly, NASDAQ was stronger and did not need to retrace to a discount, but that's the kind of stuff you need to notice on the go. And as I said, I was not in front of my charts, which I guess is a mistake by my part because we did have a beautiful setup that was offered here. Oh, I just lowered it. So entry here, and then you would look for 3 PD arrays to invalidate your idea. So this first PD array, then you have fair value gap, and before reaching the no inverted fair value gap. Okay, so your stop would be at the low of this candle. 28.5 is quite a wide stop. So when I do have a wide stop like this, I like to just go for a straight 2R and just take profit there. If we look at standard deviations of our breaker block, let's mark those out. And if I put up -5 and 5.5, I'm guessing it will be quite beautiful. Yeah, right here. So just before being overextended. And if I utilize the manipulation leg that had SMT, we are looking at 4 and 4.5 with reversal range being in this area. So that's pretty clean, if you ask me. We are looking at higher time frames, so my low-hanging fruit would be this external range liquidity. I usually like to mark out my higher time frame swing points. So if I go to a 4-hour, you'll see this swing point as well, just to frame partials. So if I'm up enough RR, I want to be taking a partial here. But as we can tell right here from this setup, it did not offer enough for me to be interested in taking it. So definitely not the most beautiful setup because I would like to take money out at this level, but it was not an opportunity. So I would just target somewhere around 2. And this offers 2.23 with your terminus for standard deviation. So you still had your objective and then left a runner, puts break even up to that external range liquidity and possibly let it run. Because whenever I am trading in direction with the higher time frame expansion and we are bullish, I don't expect it to sweep the high. I expect it to run the high. So you have take profit 1, take profit 2, and then runner that you can close at 4. That's usually how it is. If you're trading prop firms, you're going to be 4, 405. Those are the basic rules. I like to just have a basic rule of closing all my trades at 4 no matter what. When it is a trending day, classic buy day or classic sell day, usually price will run on in your direction up until 4 p.m. So I like to just close it at this level. I do want to take a second and look at ES because if you followed SMT, ES was the stronger asset at this time. So you'd be looking for setup on ES. And more specifically, since there is SMT here, you can treat price as if it took out this low, which means what? Low, high, lower low because of the SMT, and then trading back above this high forms a breaker block. So that is a breaker block formed with the SMT. I can frame it in that specific way, right? The breaker block on ES is a breaker block. The breaker block on NASDAQ is a breaker block on ES. Let me just restart this so it lines up correctly. All right, so now looking at this, we can see a clear unicorn right here. Let me just draw it out unicorn, it is the same, aligned, right? It's aligned in the same way, and retracement to a discount. This would be too far. This fair value gap, which is the same on NASDAQ, would be too far from the ES breaker for me to even consider anything there. Even if I'm looking at this breaker, this fair value gap is just too far away. It is 3 handles on ES, which again is too far away for my liking. But this bottom one is okay, right? It is, let me just look at it, 1.5 handles, so it's half the distance. Then you have fair value gap, order block, along with the fair value gap below actually. So your stop would be a 4 handle stop on ES, which to me is quite decently large. Honestly, if we're talking ES, a 4 handle stop is on the larger side, but still less if we compare it to NASDAQ. So I do want to mark out these important swing highs. Again, as I'm saying, I'm looking for SMT to form there. So these are clear objectives. And to your first objective, this does look like 2R, right? One tick above will be 2R. So your setup on ES offered more R just in general. And then you had your second objective, which was your higher time frame objective, which offered 9R compared to 3. So see what it does sometimes? Same 3PD array stop loss rule, same setup, but just a deeper retracement offered way more R on ES. So today, as I said, I missed it. I got off my charts. And anyways, I wasn't too interested once we got there. To me, it's more about missing this entry and then just running without retracement, really. But you did have this setup, which was a bit on the harder part to find, because you had to be always on point and always attentive to what your chart was doing. But you did have a setup during the 1050 to 1110 macro, which if we look at 1050 specifically, that's where SMT, then you have a small accumulation, you have a last move down before expansion, which is linked to your 11 AM power 3, formed the wick. Actually, bottom wick was very small, went up, went to put up the low, and then expanded higher. But it did offer, what was it again, 2R for a tick above this swing. And again, we are bullish. We're expecting price to run through objectives, not just sweep them. And even if you want to see a sweep, stop runs are deep. They are not shallow. So you're not expecting it to tick one tick above and then stop. You'd need to see quite a run. If I get one tick above, to me that is just inducement. Kind of like here, this did not take it out yet in my mind. This took it out. I need to see a move through it. If not, this is just inducement, making this liquidity even stronger. Does that make sense for you guys? As I said, small audience tonight, but I hope you guys found a lot of valuable insight in here. And just classic buy day, trending day, I'm always looking at the same things, right? I'm not going to tell you about the continuation entry here in the late afternoon when you already ran, what was that, 42 handles on ES. And if we look at NASDAQ, we're looking at about, let's just call it 130. So let's look at 130 somewhere out here. While you run all the way here, you already ran 205 handles since New York Open and 320 handles on the day. So is it a high probability setup to be looking at a continuation in the afternoon? Fuck no. But you did have your possible setups this morning. The more I look at it, the more I'm pissed that I missed it because I got out. This was still a valuable setup. The kind of setup where I'm like, okay, well, we are overextended, so let me put half risk into it because we still have our higher time frame objectives. But I decided to take a step back, and for once, taking a step back was not a good thing on this specific day because I just left too early when I didn't have anything to do. So definitely one for my journal tonight. I hope you guys were able to catch a piece of it. There was a lot of movement today, but we'll speak more on it at the end of the week, right? When we review it. Lastly, do you guys have any questions before we close this? No questions. All right. Well, I'm very glad that you guys were here. If there was no one, it hasn't happened yet, but if no one comes to these calls, then I'm just not going to do it. So very happy to see your faces. I don't care if we're 2, I don't care if we're 10. It will all be the same for me. So very glad to see you guys, and we will talk again on Friday for price action review, because tomorrow there is no trading. So I wish you guys a great day, I hope, in case you guys are not trading. And yes, good night, Joe. You guys have a great time. We'll see each other soon.